Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. Today's session is part of an ALCTS series on the topic of libraries and online learning. This series is designed to promote effective participation by librarians in the online learning environment and specifically to provide background knowledge for librarians in ALCTS specialties to lead in this endeavor. Today's presentation is Opportunities and Challenges of Using Third-Party MOOCs on Campus. We're delighted to have Rebecca Griffiths, Program Director for Online Learning at Ithaka S+R, New York, New York, as our presenter. Ithaka S+R is a not-for-profit organization providing research and advisory services to help academic, cultural, and publishing communities make the transition to the digital environment. Rebecca launched Ithaka's strategic services practice, helping online education initiatives deepen their understanding of their audiences and to develop sustainable projects. She was a founding member of ALCTS, a nonprofit initiative to develop online primary resources from and about Africa for research and teaching. In today's presentation, Rebecca will discuss new research on the opportunities and challenges associated with using third-party MOOCs in campus-based courses. She will share findings from a joint project of the University System of Maryland and Ithaka S+R, in which faculty members at 6 campuses tried incorporating MOOCs in several courses. Rebecca will describe the implementation process and the experience for instructors in this project. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to each attendee shortly after the conclusion of the program. We'll pause during the presentation for questions, and we will pause at the end as well. Please type your questions in the question box that appears on your screen. If there are more questions than time, Rebecca has graciously agreed to answer any questions that could not be answered during the session later. And now, as I turn the podium over to Rebecca, there may be a short delay.
Good afternoon. This is Rebecca Griffiths. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you all on the subject of using MOOCs on campus. As Caroline said in her introduction, I'm going to talk about some opportunities and challenges associated with using existing MOOCs that were created at other institutions in campus-based courses. And what I'm going to share with you today is largely based on a project that we have engaged in with the University System of Maryland over the last year and a half. And let me say also that I'm very grateful to ALCTS for hosting this event. What I'd like to cover in the next hour is first to provide some background about the study, how it's designed, what some of our motivations were. I'm then going to focus primarily on the feedback we have gotten from instructors so far. As I will explain in a minute, we engaged in a number of tests over last summer and fall, and we have not yet released our final report on how these tests went. So what I'm going to share today is sort of an early glimpse of the finding from this study. We're not yet prepared to share all of what we've learned, but I hope that what we are able to share will be of interest. I'll also talk about some of the pros and cons that we have uncovered or surfaced of using MOOCs compared to other types of online course materials that faculty may use in their teaching and in their instruction. Finally, I'm going to share some thoughts about where MOOCs may be headed. These are less grounded in our research and more based on what I've heard from people working in the MOOC world and what I've sort of gleaned from those conversations. So to provide some background on this study, we've worked with the University System of Maryland and with Coursera to test use of MOOCs in 14 courses across the system over the past year. These tests took place in a large and a diverse set of institutions ranging from research universities to regional comprehensives to institutions serving metropolitan areas to HBCUs. We worked exclusively with the Coursera platform for MOOCs. We had hoped to be able to work with multiple MOOC platforms, but in the time that we were assembling these tests, we were only able to find matches with the Coursera platform. Our study did actually encompass use of some other online learning types of materials. We worked with Pearson, some of Pearson's foundational math products, as well as with the Open Learning Initiative, but I'm not going to focus on those, that part of the study in this discussion today. The research design encompassed 4 side-by-side comparison tests comparing hybrid sections that combined MOOCs with some face-to-face instruction with sections that were taught in a traditional face-to-face manner. 2 of these side-by-side comparison tests, in 2 of these tests, the hybrid sections had significantly less class time than the traditional sections, and in 2 of them, the MOOCs were used entirely as supplementary materials in addition to the class time. We also felt that it would be useful to conduct a number of case studies, and these were in courses that did not lend themselves to side-by-side comparisons because they were smaller, they were in discursive subjects, a number of them were upper-level seminar classes, but the faculty had come to us with very interesting ideas of ways they could incorporate MOOCs into their classes, and we felt that we would learn a lot through the implementation process and from seeing what some of the benefits and challenges were of using MOOCs in those ways. For 13 out of 14 of these tests, Coursera worked with us to set up local versions of the MOOCs, so each faculty member had control of the MOOC that he or she was using in her own classroom. She could make modifications or adaptations to make it fit with what she wanted to accomplish in her class. And as I'll show you in a minute, they employed a range of strategies in how they made this work. Our evaluation consisted of several types of data collection. We evaluated learning outcomes for the 4 side-by-side tests, looking at pass rates, scores on post-test or common exam questions, and grades in those courses. We conducted surveys of all students in the side-by-side tests and the case studies to understand their experience and how they felt about using MOOCs compared to the face-to-face experience or other kinds of online materials. We conducted a number of interviews with the instructors to learn about some of the implementation challenges they experienced as they were trying to incorporate these new materials into their courses, and then at the conclusion of the class to get a sense of how they thought it went. For each of these instructors, we had asked them to define a problem they were trying to solve or a goal they had for the use of these materials, and then at the end of the semester we went back and asked, did you feel like you accomplished what you had hoped? Finally, we felt that it was very important to examine not just the potential benefits of these materials, but also the costs. And the costs are both include the upfront investment that's required to redesign courses using new kinds of online materials, but also the potential for ongoing cost savings through the use of these materials. So we invested quite a bit of energy in collecting time use data from faculty, which we have determined to be the largest factor, the largest cost driver for delivering undergraduate instruction. So I'm going to now share some of the feedback that we received from instructors. One of the questions we asked was what components of MOOCs they used in their courses. And you can see here they employed a range of different strategies. 3 of them used the entire MOOC. And for those of you who are not so familiar with MOOCs, they often contain lecture videos, many have in-video quizzes, they have other forms of assessments, they use discussion forums, some of them have peer grading for papers. So faculty had to decide which of these elements would fit well with their courses. 3 of them used the entire MOOC. 11 used multiple components of the courses, so they used not just the videos but also quizzes or peer grading function and forums. And 4 of them used only the videos. all of the faculty who participated in this test designed their own assessments for their courses. None of them relied exclusively on the assessments that were included with the MOOC, and I think this gets to one of the challenges I will come to in a minute, having to do with the fit of the difficulty of fitting a MOOC within an existing course. The instructors identified a number of benefits from the use of these materials in their classes. Several of them said that they found this was very valuable for their own professional development in their fields. They learned new information in their disciplines that maybe they've been out of, after they've been out of graduate school for a few years, sort of a refresher course on some of the new topics. They really enjoyed seeing how very distinguished professors in their fields taught certain topics. They felt that they gained a lot just from the exposure to these different courses and seeing how different people teach them. They also felt that it was valuable for their students to be exposed to the different perspectives, to the different teaching styles, and to the different sort of levels of discourse that were provided through these MOOCs. To give one specific example, one of our faculty partners had her students participate in a course called Modern Poetry from a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And that particular MOOC has the video lectures, are not lectures, they are videos of a seminar-style discussion between the professor and his students. And the professor in our partner in Maryland felt that the students really benefited from that sort of modeling of how a very high-level intellectual discourse looks, and that they pushed themselves in their own class discussions to make those kinds of high-level analytical comments. She even replicated the MOOC video format in her own class by recording some of their class discussions and putting those online so the students could see themselves in that kind of role. Several of the faculty that we worked with felt that the MOOCs helped to raise the level of the class discussion, again through the exposure, but also because they helped to convey difficult technical information in a more engaging or accessible way than other secondary source materials that were available. One professor mentioned that he typically relied on textbooks to deliver this kind of technical information, but it's very dry and difficult for his students to grasp, and that because he had access to these MOOC lectures, that helped the students come to class better prepared and to engage in more meaningful discussions. One of our faculty partners found a MOOC that was particularly useful for augmenting her course in a subject that was not her personal specialization. So she, for a third of her course, she used a MOOC to teach a topic, in this case industrial design, which she didn't have extensive training in, so that helped to fill a particular need for her. In her case, it's also worth noting that she works in a fairly small institution. She's the only full-time faculty member in her department. She has a number of upper-class students who have her for all 4 or 5 of their classes. And so I can imagine in that kind of a situation that having access to instruction provided by another faculty member is in itself a benefit for those students. Several of the instructors we worked with found MOOCs very useful as a way to flip their classes, and gain flexibility in use of face-to-face time. By flipping, I mean that they could assign students to watch the video lectures in their own time and come to class prepared to have discussions rather than be lectured to. This is becoming a very popular mode of instruction to replace lecture courses, but it really relies upon having access to materials that can be delivered outside of class time. A couple faculty members said that they would love to create their own online video lectures in order to flip their classes, but they simply don't have the time or the resources to do that. So having access to MOOCs made that kind of approach possible. Finally, they found MOOCs useful in replacing textbooks, and I wanted to share a quote with you, one of my favorite quotes from the professors we worked with, who said he felt that the video lectures were brilliant. They fulfilled a need for materials that integrated a lot of specialized information in an accessible, fun way without having to buy or rent expensive DVDs or other textbooks, and using the MOOC raised the level of the class. So I think that really indicated to me the potential for some of these kinds of materials to be valuable tools for faculty teaching in traditional institutions. We also spent a fair amount of time exploring their time use, how much time faculty spent preparing and delivering their courses, and whether they thought the MOOCs were a net drain on time or might have the potential to save time. This was kind of a speculative exercise looking forward, because we were only able to do one iteration of the tests. We would have liked to do multiple iterations, but given how new the MOOC content was at the time we were putting this test together, it simply wasn't possible to sort of plan 3 years into the future. Still, we got an interesting mix of reactions here. 6 of the instructors who participated in this test said that the MOOCs saved them time even in this first iteration. 3 of those were instructors who were co-teaching sections of a course that was designed by a course coordinator. So in that case, the course coordinator had spent the summer planning the course with incorporating the MOOC materials, and other instructors were assigned fairly late in the day to come in and teach other various sections of that course. And so for them, it saved a lot of time. They spent less time coming to class, and they also felt like they didn't need to spend as much time preparing for class. 7 of them said no, MOOCs did not save them any time this time, and they did not think that they would in the future. They spent a lot of time redesigning their courses around the MOOCs, and they thought that even if they were to do this again, they would still want to go back and review the videos and look at the assessments again, so they didn't really see the potential for time savings. And 5 of the instructors said that the MOOCs saved them some time, did not save time this iteration, but might in the future. Just to give you a sense of the scale of how time-consuming it was to do these course designs using the MOOCs, the average and the median time spent planning these courses was right around 175 to 180 hours in total. This includes data from 11 instructors who submitted timesheets for both the summer and the fall. We actually have more timesheets for the fall, but those don't include time spent over the summer. So this is just a subset of our tests. But this is a lot of time, and I think it's important to recognize that the faculty who were participating in this study were primarily focused on trying to get to the best outcome for their students. They were not thinking about how can I save as much time as possible using these materials, nor did we ask them to do that, or did they have any incentive to do that. So this doesn't. These data don't tell you how much time they could have, whether it would have been possible to redesign their courses in less time, but this tells you how much time it took them, given that complete freedom. At the conclusion of the course, we asked a number of questions to all of the instructors. One high-level question was, would you like to use a MOOC in your teaching again? And here the reactions were overwhelmingly positive. Of those that participated in these final interviews, 15 said yes, absolutely, they definitely would like to do it. 1 said no, she didn't see a lot in it for her. And 3 said they might with certain conditions. They felt that if they had a specific need and there happened to be a MOOC or a set of MOOC materials that met that need, that they would be interested in doing that, but they wouldn't do it just for the sake of working with the MOOC. We recognize that this is a somewhat self-selected group of faculty. These are people who volunteered to be part of this study, and they are usually, many of them would be considered the innovators on campus. So we also asked them whether they would recommend to their colleagues that they try teaching with a MOOC. The intent here being to ask, we we know that you like to try new things and experiment with new things, but maybe this isn't for everyone. Do you think that this is good for would be good for your colleagues as well? And again, nearly all of them said yes, absolutely, I would tell other people to try this. One of our partners, a couple of our partners made the comment that they had initially had fears about what MOOCs might mean for faculty. I mean, this is no secret that there are a lot of concerns that MOOCs will have a negative impact on faculty nationwide and demote them to the role of teaching assistants or cause massive layoffs. I mean, I think those fears have kind of died off over the past year. But still, some of the faculty who participated in this project were aware of those kinds of concerns when they started out. And at the conclusion, they said that those fears were really allayed. First, they did not see any evidence that their students could really take full advantage of these course materials independently. They really felt that their role as the local instructor, facilitating the use of the materials, making the connection with the students, matching the assessments to the students' level was really crucial, and that the students really value their personal relationships with the faculty. They were content in some cases to use the MOOCs for the content delivery, but they still really value the class time and the personal interaction. So these faculty members who said, you know, I used to have some fears about this. I actually don't believe anymore that that's a real threat. I think that other faculty members, that my colleagues could really benefit from use of these materials, and you know, I think that perhaps if people can start describing what they are in with different terminology and get away from the term MOOC altogether, that would be helpful, because that term in itself has become somewhat problematic. But they really felt that there were benefits here that people should explore. During the implementation process, we surfaced many challenges in using MOOC content in classroom environments. The biggest one for pretty much all of our faculty partners was trying to fit MOOCs into their course syllabus. The MOOCs reflect the priorities and the teaching styles and of the professors who created them, and often of the types of students that those professors are used to teaching. They sometimes assumed levels of prior knowledge or of quantitative skills that the students in our partner institutions did not have, especially those who were coming in as first-year students. The MOOCs sometimes taught concepts in a different sequence or placed priorities on different concepts or topics than our faculty partners would have liked to. So for example, we used a MOOC on introductory statistics MOOC, which you might think was a fairly standard topic, in a course with the University of Maryland at College Park, and found that it was really, the match was very poor, that the MOOC we were trying to use taught statistics for psychologists. There was a lot of focus on experimental design. It used an open source statistical analysis package that assumed a very high level of facility with programming and math, and that just simply wasn't appropriate for the context in which we were trying to use the MOOC, which was in an introductory statistics course for sociologists. So that example, I think, just exposed some of the issues that can arise when you try to take a course from one environment and place it in another. As I alluded to in that case, in a number of our tests, the faculty found that the degree of difficulty in the MOOCs was too high for their students or too low for their students. A couple of them said that some portions of the MOOCs they were using seemed more appropriate for seniors or for graduate level students in their own institutions, whereas they were trying to use them in introductory level courses targeted to first or second year students. On the flip side, some of them found that the assessments in the MOOCs were not what they would expect for a university level course, and so that was one of the reasons that faculty felt that they needed to make their own. We ran into many technical issues, and I think here it's important to emphasize, in fact through all of this it's important to emphasize, that the MOOCs and the MOOC platform were not designed for the purpose that we were trying to use them for. Coursera was designed to deliver courses directly to students on the open internet. It was not designed to be used by instructors to teach courses on their own campuses. So it was not surprising at all that many of these issues arose. On the technical front, we found that there were a number of issues trying to integrate the Coursera platform with the local learning management systems. The Coursera platform actually has a lot of features that overlap with learning management systems, and so instructors had to sort of figure out whether it made sense to have their students primarily working within the Coursera platform or primarily within their own learning management system, how the students should navigate between those, and how to make that experience as seamless as possible. And that was not easy. In a couple cases, faculty had to reverse course after the semester was already underway because the approach they had tried to take wasn't working. Students were having problems accessing the proper version of Coursera, and they just had to change course. So again, this wasn't particularly surprising, but it's just something to be aware of for the future. And it's also worth noting that we worked in our other tests we had with that used the Open Learning Initiative from Carnegie Mellon. We ran into some of the same issues. So these problems are not limited to working with MOOC platforms. I think a probably more difficult set of issues to resolve is around intellectual property. In order to get permission to use the MOOCs we used in our tests, we went through a pretty extensive process of first assembling a wish list from our faculty partners at Maryland of the MOOCs they wanted to use, going to Coursera saying we would like to use these courses, then having Coursera introduce us to each of their partners, corresponding with each of their partners to explain what it is we wanted to do, how we were going to use their MOOCs in the study, and gaining permissions from multiple constituencies at each institution. This is clearly not a scalable model. I think for use of MOOC type content to really take off and to be adopted on a larger scale, these kinds of this process of getting permission to use the content has to become much more seamless, much more transactional, and I think that's going to take some time. A number of the MOOC creators that we spoke with had some real reservations about allowing these intellectual creations to be repurposed in ways that they hadn't anticipated. One did not feel comfortable with the idea that his MOOC was going to be canned and sort of replicated like a textbook. Another said that he was very happy to have his MOOC used by his colleagues in his own institution because he knew them and felt confident that they would use it in the way that he had envisioned, but that it felt different to have faculty that he didn't know in other institutions doing the same sort of thing. And I think that is just going to take time for people to get used to different use cases. The final challenge that a lot of faculty encountered, again, this is not in any way limited to this particular test, is ensuring that students completed their online tasks. A number of the faculty felt that the students were not either weren't doing the online work or they were doing it in a sort of cursory way and were disappointed with the students' level of preparation when they came to class. Again, nothing unique about this. I think the nature of relying on students to do more independent learning that involves finding new ways to motivate them to make sure they do the independent learning and that when they come to class they really are prepared to have substantive conversations. And at the end of the semester our partners had a number of ideas about how they would do that better next time around, how they would enforce having students do quizzes before they came to class, asking students to watch the videos not just once but perhaps multiple times to make sure that they were really absorbing the material as they would if they were coming to lectures in person, in which instructors do tend to reiterate some of the same concepts multiple times. We started to get a sense of what some of the advantages and disadvantages might be of using MOOC content created by third parties, and how these advantages, how this type of material might compare to other online material, online resources that are available through other platforms. We're using MOOCs that were created by the fall of 2012. So these observations may only apply to the relatively recent set of MOOCs. I think they will change over time, and these advantages and disadvantages will change. So this is really a snapshot of what we learned over this past year. Some of the advantages include the intellectual quality of the videos and some of the lectures, that faculty really appreciated how well some of these topics were covered, and how much thought had gone into the design of these courses. The comprehensiveness of MOOCs could be thought of as either an advantage or a disadvantage. And by comprehensiveness, I mean that MOOCs are composed as entire courses. They have a beginning and an end. There's a narrative structure. They are a bundle of complementary forms of media that work together to create the whole course experience. And that may be an advantage or a disadvantage depending on how one wants to use them. If you've been teaching a course for 10 years and you're pretty happy with the way that you teach it and you don't want to make any major revisions to it, then trying to fit in this very comprehensive monolithic entity might not be the best approach. If you're starting from scratch to teach a new course, particularly in a field that is less familiar, then this might actually be a wonderful resource to have access to. MOOCs, at least as they are now, can be an attractive substitute for very costly textbooks. Of course, we don't know what the ultimate business model is going to be for MOOCs, or how much it might cost for institutions to license them for their own students' use. But unless they end up costing $200 each, there is the potential that these would be more economic alternatives. And it's worth pointing out that the MOOCs have the potential to be quite flexible in the sense that the MOOCs that were delivered to our faculty partners were a set of content on the learning management system, and so technically it was not difficult for instructors to change the time frames, to remove lectures, to add new sets of questions. Technically, it was quite easy to make those kinds of adaptations, whereas we've worked with other platforms like the Open Learning Initiative, which are more hardwired and much more difficult to edit. So they at least have the potential to be flexible, but again, this is really going to depend on how the intellectual property issues are resolved that I mentioned. Some of the disadvantages. MOOCs, massively open online courses. The open refers to MOOCs being delivered to students. They are open and free to students. They are not open in the sense of being open for remixing, repurposing, reuse in other contexts. And that again is the intellectual property that needs to be, the intellectual property issues that need to be resolved. For instructors who want to continue to use textbooks, the lack of compatibility between MOOCs and textbooks can be a challenge. So in one course, we had one of our side-by-side tests. We had sections that were using a textbook and the traditional face-to-face, and in the other sections, they were using the textbook and the MOOC and the face-to-face instruction. And the students were confused by the fact that the textbook and the MOOC were not in close alignment, that they covered topics in different ways, they used different vocabulary. You can imagine all sorts of ways in which those two things wouldn't work together. So again, for instructors who want to continue to use their textbooks, that's one kind of issue that would need to be resolved. The technical integration issues we came upon again point to the fact that MOOCs were not, relate back to the fact that MOOCs were not designed to be used in campus environments. There are other forms of content, you know, textbook supplements and online learning resources provided by publishers like McGraw-Hill and Pearson that really are designed to plug and play with existing learning management systems, and have also invested in very deep banks of practice problem sets that students can work through to achieve mastery, whereas MOOCs don't yet have that kind of functionality in place. The features in MOOC platforms are not designed for campus use, and we found that, for example, the instructor dashboards were designed to enable faculty to see how 50,000 students are progressing through a course, but they do not allow instructors to see how individual students are doing. So if one is teaching a course with 20 students, the dashboards that are currently available in MOOC platforms don't have exactly the kinds of features one would want. They don't have grade books. There's no easy way to export assessment data from one platform, from a Coursera platform, to a learning management system. So again, those features are not yet in place. I think one of the biggest issues for MOOCs, and this is true for a number of for other kinds of open learning, online learning platforms, particularly open educational resource platforms, is the lack of future clarity. It's not yet clear what the sustainability model is going to be for MOOCs, and because faculty have to invest so much time redesigning their course around these materials, I think there's going to be reluctance to invest that kind of time until people feel some confidence that those materials will be available for at least a few years into the future, and that's just not yet the case.
Rebecca, we have some questions.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to read one that has come in from an audience member.
Sure.
If I do understand the use of MOOCs on campus, with the increasing use of online materials is becoming the must-use study method as long as they have an online connection?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I think, can you repeat that?
Yes. With the use of MOOCs on campus, with the increasing use of online materials, is becoming the must-use study method as long as students have online connection.
I think that's going to depend very much on the context and on the institution's goals, but it does seem to me that that trends are sort of moving in that direction, that students are expecting to be able to do more online, and that institutions are moving in the direction of trying to understand how online learning resources and tools can help to make education more effective and potentially more efficient.
Thank you. Here's another. What's your say on the fact relating to the lack of face-to-face contact in the use of MOOCs? Taking into consideration the social connection between teachers and students, as you mentioned, how do you make sure the students have completed their online task, providing guidance and advice and so forth?
I think the personal connection is really important, and that was one of the reasons we wanted to try this model in the first place. When we looked at the data about who takes MOOCs, I think it's pretty well established that the majority of students, people who enroll in MOOCs in their public offering, are already educated to a large degree, and we don't see a lot of mainstream college students taking advantage of these resources independently. We wanted to explore ways that these materials could be embedded in a context that takes advantage of the content but still provides students with the structure that they get in a campus-based course and with the personal relationships they have with their instructors.
So if I could paraphrase, essentially, you're attempting, this approach attempts to hang on to all the advantages of face-to-face while incorporating additional materials.
Exactly. That's what we're hoping to, that's what we're aiming to explore with this study.
Very interesting. Now, I do have some more questions for the end, but let's go back to the presentation.
Okay. So I'm just going to share a few thoughts about where MOOC platforms might be headed. These are now getting outside the scope of the study and are based more on personal conversations I've had with people who work with the MOOC platforms or at their partners, and remarks that I've heard at conferences. One clear direction is that they are growing more international. Coursera in particular now has more than 50% of its institutional partners outside the United States. So this has become a very important part of their growth trajectory. There is, I think, a fairly strong focus on lifelong learners. As I said a minute ago, the data sort of point in that direction and show that a lot of people who take advantage of MOOCs are people who are already educated and they're using them for professional development or for personal enrichment. And I think the MOOC platforms naturally see that as an important audience for their courses. They have made efforts to try to figure out how to set up learning communities in different countries and different locations where they have clusters of students. This is motivated by some research that has been done by other people working in the MOOC world who have found that students who participate in learning communities or study groups are more likely to complete their courses. So Coursera in particular has partnered with some organizations to try to figure out how to set up these kinds of social experiences that help students to succeed. I've also heard at the recent Coursera Partners Conference that there's more focus on learning design and trying to make these materials more pedagogically effective. A lot of participants recognize that in the first wave of MOOCs, people were just trying to get their courses up as quickly as possible. They were not necessarily employing the best practices in terms of how those courses were designed. And now they're really trying to focus more on those design elements. Some of them are also thinking about modularity and how to make the MOOC content more easy to repurpose, more accessible to instructors or people who have different objectives for using them. You can see here on the right, desire to learn. There are new players are getting into the MOOC world, into the MOOC platform world. Several of the major learning management systems have created their own MOOC platforms. Blackboard has one, Desire to Learn has one, Canvas has one, and this will give the institutions that want to invest in creation of MOOCs potentially more flexibility in deciding for themselves how they want to make use of these materials, how they want to market them or just disseminate them. An equally important question is where are MOOC partners, and by this I mean partner institutions, headed? And I think this is equally important because these are, at the end of the day, the entities that are investing in the creation of these wonderful resources. In the recent Coursera Partners Conference, I heard a lot about the need for these partners to demonstrate how the creation of MOOCs benefits their home institutions, needing to make that case. A number of them were experimenting with ways to use MOOC content in their own institutions, either embedding them in hybrid courses or offering versions of the MOOC with different levels of local instructor facilitation for certification and even for credit. I also heard a number of them talking about experimentation with different business models. Many of these institutions are still trying to figure out how they're going to support MOOCs and the creation of them. And a couple institutions I saw give a panel talked about 8 different models they were testing out to try to figure out how they could generate some revenue to support these. Anything from micropayments to merchandising to allowing students to take a version of the MOOC for credit. I heard a lot of institutions say that they did not think that the lifelong learner market alone was going to be enough to support the creation of these resources, and so they're really trying to explore different models. And a couple of them, Ed Rock from the University of Pennsylvania, explicitly said we need to figure out an institutional licensing model, and we need to do it quickly. So I think that gave me a sense of optimism that some of these institutional partners also see the potential benefits for using MOOC content as enabling instructors in other institutions to use those materials in their teaching. So to summarize, what we have learned in this study is that there are significant opportunities for institutions to use third-party MOOCs to create hybrid and flipped classes without creating all of the online materials from scratch, to add content that is otherwise impossible for an institution to create locally, and potentially to save faculty time, although this is the area in which we were able to make the least progress, I would say. However, for these benefits to be realized, the providers are going to have to decide that this is a priority. They're going to have to make the implementation easier. They're going to have to address some of the technical issues, and most importantly, the intellectual property issues. And finally, I think that on the demand side, the conversation around MOOCs needs to shift from these being things that are going to replace faculty or really degrade the nature of their work, to thinking about MOOCs as tools faculty can use to accomplish their own teaching objectives. So I think that is everything I wanted to cover today. I'd be happy to take more questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. I found that a very stimulating presentation, and I do have a few more questions, and perhaps a few more will come in. To start off with, after all, I'm a librarian. From what you learned through this project, Rebecca, what do you think are the implications for librarians who supply resources and research aid?
That's a great question, Caroline. It's interesting. I went to a OCLC workshop convening last year that was on this topic, but much of the discussion was focused on how librarians support the creation of MOOCs, and that entails things like licensing content, especially when faculty use third-party owned intellectual property in their courses. There was almost no discussion of how librarians might identify these kinds of resources for faculty who are looking for online materials to use in their own courses. And that's what I would hope to see more of. I understand that while MOOCs continue to be fairly proprietary and have such restrictive uses that most people won't even consider them as a possible source. But I think that if the MOOC platform operators and their institutional partners hear that there is demand from other institutions for these content, that there is a real interest in licensing these kinds of resources, that they will be more willing to make the investments in making that possible. So I think librarians can play a role in that if they agree that there is a potential benefit here in helping faculty to identify what the best materials are for the needs of a particular course, whether that's a MOOC or open learning initiative or some open educational resource or some other
or some combination of all of these.
Exactly.
Thank you. Here's another question. Could you indicate what subjects these third-party MOOCs were in? Were they social science, humanities, math? And do you think that the disciplines could have had an impact on your survey results?
Yes, so the MOOCs covered a lot of disciplines. We had math, computer science, communications, philosophy, economics, a comparative economics course. There were a couple in the classics. There was really a mix, and I think that this mix of disciplines very well may have impacted the results of the student surveys. As we will, in our report that will come out in a few weeks, we'll share some more data about how the students responded to various courses, but I can say at a high level that students generally prefer the courses that used the more discursive, in the hybrid courses in more discursive subjects. So the hybrid courses that used ancient Greek and Roman mythology, or Think Again to Reason and Argue, which is a logic course, those were very popular. The courses that used an introductory programming course and another one in an open learning initiative biology course, I think students struggled more with, and in those courses students seemed most, indicated the most need for face-to-face time with their instructors.
I realize you have not released this data yet, but do you think that the discomfort in these courses had to do with the discrepancies between the approach of the MOOC and the approach of the professor? Or just a lack of background to deal with, to integrate?
It's hard to say. I think it calls for some speculation. These are courses that students struggle with all the time. And part of the reason that we were doing these experiments is because these are courses that had significant withdrawal or failure rates. So I think it's not surprising that students struggled, especially in those courses. But I think it's too soon to say why they did.
Thank you. We have time for another question. Are there any more questions? I see no more coming in. So we will move to the close of this webinar. And I want to say thank you, Rebecca. I found it very enlightening. I had not considered this subject before, and I can certainly see the utility of thinking of MOOCs in this particular way. And thank you, Ai-Ping, Chen Gaffey, and Aaron Boyd for your technical support. Thank you, attendees, for participating in our effort to extend libraries' contributions to lifelong learning in the evolving digital world. Thank you especially for sending in your questions. In addition to the link to the recording of today's session, we hope that you will also take a moment to complete a short survey about this webinar. The answers that you give us will help us plan future continuing education offerings targeted to interests you will describe. We hope to see you at other ALCTS webinars and web courses, and you can see some of them on the screen now, perhaps on a topic that you have suggested. And again, thank you very much for participating in our event today. And thank you, Rebecca.
My pleasure.